Numbers chapter 21, verse 4. Numbers chapter 21, verse number 4. Numbers chapter 21, verse 4. We're going to read that fourth verse together. Do you have it? Ready? Let's read.
And they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to compass the land of Edom. And the soul of the people was much discouraged because of the way.
You can be seated. I want to talk to you this morning about how to deal with discouragement. How to deal with discouragement. I'm convinced that one of the chief weapons that the enemy uses against us is discouragement. One of the chief weapons that he uses against us, close the door, is discouragement. And we'll have to effectively learn how to deal with that discouragement if we're going to become what God wants us to be. Discouragement means to dishearten. It means to advise or persuade a person to not do a thing, to prevent someone from doing something. And there are really three causes of discouragement. And they are things, events, and people. And we see this vividly in the scriptures. In our foundation of scripture, it says, the people's soul was discouraged because of the way, or because of the trials of the way that they were going. And those were events. And many times, we look at the lives of other people and we compare ourselves to them. And we look at how their lives is going. And we become discouraged because our lives is not going like other people's lives, or the events, or the way that our life is going. Sometimes it seems as though God is blessing other people and showering on them. And it seems like, you're not being blessed. It seems like everything is going wrong in your life. And you become discouraged because many times we blame God. We say, God, look at how their lives is going, or the way their life is going. Why can't my life be like that other individual's life? And the first thing you have to realize, you don't really know what's going on in that person's life anyway.
Yeah.
All you see is the outside.
Yeah.
All you see is the external. And secondly, it's up to God to take a person the way he wants them to go.
That's true.
If he decides to take you a route other than what he takes somebody else, that's God's doing.
Amen.
So we have to come to the place where we understand this and we don't let how God is leading us or what God is allowing to happen in our lives to discourage us. And the final thing, and I think this is the greatest way that the enemy discourages us, is through people.
Amen.
In Numbers chapter 32, as Israel was about to go into the promised land, they sent out spies, and 12 of them, and 10 came back and said, this land is the people in the land are so great, they're giants, we can't conquer it. Two of them, Joshua and Caleb, said, we're able to conquer the land. In essence, Joshua and Caleb was saying, you have to listen to what God has said. God has said to us, wherever our foot trod, that is going to be our land. We're going to possess wherever our foot trods or wherever our foot touches. But Israel listened to the 10 that came back with the evil report. And those 10 individuals discouraged the whole nation of Israel. And they failed to enter into the blessings of God. They failed to enter into what God had for them. So you can't allow people to discourage you. You can't allow people to whisper things in your ear or tell you things that causes you not to believe God and not to believe what God has said to you. You've got to come to the place where you've got to hold on to what God has said to you. It comes to a time when you have to really, it comes to the time where, it's put up or shut up, saints, for us. It's time for us to either do what God has told us to do, or we might as well go on back into the world and quit. It's time for us to stop faking and acting as though, everything is okay. We got to come to the place where we learn to deal with the lessons of life. We learn to deal with discouragement. If we don't, we'll never become what God has for us. Yeah. If you look at the external, if you look at how things are going, if you look at the events of your life, if you look at the way that God is doing things, this takes your focus off of what God is really trying to do in your life. Amen. So things discourage you, events discourage you, and people discourage you. It even says that the people discourage themselves. You can talk yourself out of what God has for you. Because you start looking at things and you start looking at circumstances and you start looking at things as the way you think it should be. You've got to learn to look beyond what you see with your natural eyes. Amen. So what can discouragement do in your life? What can discouragement do? I've given you the causes of discouragement. What can it actually do in your life? It can cause you to speak against God. And believe it or not, when you begin to speak against God, you sin. It's no ifs, ands, and buts. When you start saying things that are foolish concerning God, you sin. Numbers 21:5 says, and the people spake or spoke against God. 21 verse 7 says, the people said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against God. See, after God's judgment came upon them, they realized that they shouldn't have said what they said. They realized that they shouldn't have spoken against him. But see, you don't say things like that and the judgment of God won't come. God sent serpents into the camp, and those serpents begin to bite them. And those venomous serpents, they begin to die as a result of them speaking against God, as a result of them saying the wrong things concerning God. Be careful what you say about God. Be careful what you say concerning God. If you say the wrong things, you open the door for the devil to work in your life. That's right. Do you understand that? Your words are the doorway, the opening through which you let the devil come into your life and wreak havoc. You've got to be careful what you say. They spoke against God. The second thing that discouragement can do is that it can cause you to speak against God's leadership. We always got something to say about the way we think things ought to be. I really don't think it ought to be like that. If it was me doing it, I wouldn't do it that way. The point is, it's not you. And secondly, if you was doing it, you don't actually know what you would do because you've never been in that position. And you got to learn, listen, when you speak against God's leadership, you're also speaking against him. Amen. And you know, and one thing God does, he allows the principle of sowing and reaping to come into our lives.
Yeah.
And see, we think that, you know, when we open our mouth and say things against God or against God's leadership, that those things are not going to come back to us. But you got to understand, you know, God has a way of allowing things to come back. You know, when you start saying things like that against the leadership that God has put in place, do you not know when God, or if God ever allows you to be in leadership, that's the same thing that's going to come back to you.
Yes.
If you're a rebel and won't follow leadership and won't do what God says to you through your leader, that's the kind of people you're going to get. That's the principle of sowing and reaping. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatever man or woman soweth, that shall he also reap.
Amen.
Numbers 21:5, the people spoke against God, and not only did they speak against God, they spoke against Moses. Why have you brought us out here in this desert to die? There's no water here. Moses, you don't know what you're doing. Why are you leading us this way? We should have went the other direction. In essence, Moses, you don't know what you're doing. And God don't know what he's doing because he got you as a leader. God don't know and you don't know. In 1 Samuel 30:6, the people were distressed and they spoke against David. And they said, David, we're going to stone you. Why? Because the Amalekites came and took their children and their wives and their goods, and they were so discouraged and distressed. They wanted to kill David. Was it David's fault that the Amalekites invaded their village? No. David didn't ask any of those 600 men to bring their wives and their children, or even them to come where he was. He went by himself. And you know, it's debatable whether David should have been in the land of the Philistines. But he didn't say, hey, y'all come and follow me to Philistia. You know, come on over here. They followed him. Yeah. And when the enemy attacked, they blamed him. And that's the way people do. You know, as long as things is going all right, oh, you're so wonderful. Oh, you're so great. Oh, you're such a great leader. Oh, but the moment something goes wrong in their lives, they don't look at the root cause of why things are going wrong in their lives. They look for somebody to blame.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the easiest person to blame, most people are not going to blame God, but the easiest person to blame is the pastor, is the leader. Michael Jackson's song said, I'm looking at the man in the mirror. Sometimes you don't do what God has said through leadership. And then when things start happening, why is it the leader's fault? Why is it even God's fault when you're not obedient?
That's right.
Whose fault is it that you don't obey the instructions that God gave you? Whose fault is it that you choose to do something other than the counsel that God has given you? And then it allows the enemy free course in your life. Is that the leader's fault?
No.
So it will cause you to speak against God's leadership. Number 3, it will cause you to despise the blessings of God. Verse 5 says, for there is no bread, neither is there any water, and our soul loatheth this light bread. Light in the Hebrew means worthless. Now, listen to what Israel is saying. God, this manna that you let come down every morning from heaven, that nobody has ever eaten before in the history of the world, that all you have to do is go out and gather it, and it's ready to eat, is worthless. I hate it. Do you know you can let this discouragement build up in your life so much that what God has done in your life becomes to you as though it's worthless? there is no bread. Yeah, it was bread. You complained that you didn't have bread, and God let bread come down from heaven for you every morning as the dew. You complained that there was no water, and God let water come out of the rocks. You complained that there was no water, or the water was bitter, and God said to the leader, throw a tree in the water, and the water became sweet. Despising the blessings of God and saying it's worthless. When we are blessed by God, we shouldn't take this lightly. We shouldn't, act as though we deserve it and as though, it's something, that we ought to get. When God blesses us with anything, we ought to be happy that God blessed us.
Amen.
We ought to be so thankful that God just chose to do something wonderful in our lives. But what we do when we get discouraged, instead of blessing God and thanking God for it, we complain about it. God bless you with a car, and when you get discouraged, well, this car ain't like everybody else's car. They got this and they got that. Well, if God bless you with you somewhere to live, and you complain about that, well, Lord, this old raggedy house. Well, you could be under the bridge in a cardboard box.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could be living in a shelter.
Yeah.
The very thing that God bless you with, you despise it. You say, well, I don't despise the blessing of God, Pastor. Oh, really? Have you ever said something like that? You were on the bus line, riding the bus, and, take you 2 hours, 3 hours to get to work, and God bless you with a car, and then you get discouraged, and you talk about, the car that God bless you with. But you passing folk by and still riding the bus, but you despising the car that God gave you. That's what discouragement will do. You've got to come to the realization, you've got to learn how to deal with discouragement.
Amen.
The fourth thing it will do, it will cause you not to enter into God's blessings. Do you know you can become so discouraged that you will put yourself in a position where God won't bless you? Actually, he can't, because he can't bless murmurers and complainers and belly achers. He can't do that. He won't. Numbers 32:9 said, for they went up unto the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, and they discouraged the heart of the people of Israel, that they should not go into the land which the Lord had given them. Now, the Lord gave you something, but you let somebody else tell you it's not yours. God gave them Canaan, but they allowed those 10 spies to discourage them so much that they didn't go into. They missed out on the promised land. They missed out on the blessings of God. They missed out on a land that was so fertile that a cluster of grapes, it took 2 men to carry that. The pomegranates were as big as basketballs. But they allowed 10 people that couldn't see beyond their natural eyes to discourage them, and they missed out on that. And for 40 years, they couldn't enter into the promised land. God allowed them, because they wouldn't enter in, because they wouldn't believe him, because they wouldn't do what he said, to wander around in the desert. And every one of those individuals that refused to believe God died in the desert. And God raised up their children, and their children were the ones that went into the promised land. And you know what? Their children hadn't really experienced the God like their parents had. They hadn't seen those 10 plagues that God put upon Israel. They hadn't seen the Red Sea experience. They hadn't seen, the miraculous thing, the water coming from the rock and the water being made, sweet. They hadn't seen, all of these things. They only heard of these things, but their parents had actually experienced them, but they would not enter in. And God took that Joshua generation. The only individual left from that generation was Joshua and Caleb. And they were old men. But God did something for not only those children, but he did something for Joshua and Caleb. Because Joshua and Caleb believed him. Joshua and Caleb were old men, but the Bible says their strength hadn't diminished. They were as though they were still young men. And Joshua and Caleb said, when they were ready to enter into the promised land, give me my mountain. I'm ready to go in and take what God said was for me. You got to come to the realization where you understand if God said it, all you got to do is do it.
Amen. Amen.
It don't matter if you're old or young. If God said it, God meant for it to come to pass in your life.
Amen.
So what do you have to do to deal with discouragement? I hope I'm helping you this morning, because I want you to understand every one of us at some time in our life is going to become discouraged. And you can't let it cause you to speak against God. You can't let it cause you to speak against God's leadership. You can't let it cause you to despise God's blessing. You can't let it allow you not to enter into the blessings that God has for you. Your promised land. Do you know God has a promised land for you? I'm not talking about a literal, plot of land. I'm talking about a realm and a place that you haven't really been to yet, that God wants to take you to. But if you get discouraged, you're not going to get there.
Yeah.
I'm learning to look beyond what I see. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard for you to look beyond and look past things sometimes. But I'm learning how to do that. I'm learning how to look beyond what people do, what people say. I'm learning how to do that. Because God has made me some promises. And I'm just crazy enough to believe what God told me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this. Maybe you won't see it. But I'm going to see it with my eyes. Now, if you want to stick around long enough to see it, you can.
Yeah.
If you want to stick around, not just long enough to see it, but be a beneficiary of it, you can. Because I know what God told me.
Yeah.
My question is, do you know what he told you? And are you going to allow discouragement to cause you not to get what God said you're going to get? So how do you deal with it? The first thing you must do to deal with discouragement is you got to learn how to encourage yourself. What we do, we look for people to encourage us. And you know what? You are supposed to get encouragement from other people.
Amen.
The scripture tells us to encourage one another.
Yes.
The scripture tells us, to comfort one another. It tells us to do those things. But sometimes people get so wrapped up in their little world and their little issues and their little things that they're going through, they forget about you, baby. And here you are looking for, them to come by and tell you, something good, or, call you on the telephone and tell you, that they praying for you, and you don't get to call, Lord, I thought you were going to, have somebody call me. I got up discouraged this morning. The devil is attacking me and I've been sowing seeds of encouragement, Lord. When is somebody going to call me? Well, encourage yourself.
Yeah.
Don't wait for them folk to call you, because they just might not do it.
Yeah.
David in first Samuel 30:6, it says that David encouraged himself in the Lord.
Yeah.
In Judges 20:22, it said the people of Israel encouraged themselves. How do you encourage yourself? You remember the past things that God has done for you. You look back and you remember what God has done for you in the past. And you begin to rehearse those things over and over in your mind. And even though nothing may not be happening right now, you look back and remember what God did in the past. And because you realize that because God did it in the past, that God can do it again. And you let that, just bubble in your spirit. And before you know it, you've encouraged yourself. And you say, God, you did it before. And you did this very thing, as he went down one day, and Goliath was, cursing the armies of God. And not only was he cursing the armies of God, he was cursing God. And Israel, the mighty men of Israel were afraid. Even Saul, 6 foot, more than 6 foot and robust, hiding in his tent. And little old, baby boy David, 14 or 15 years old, and he heard what the Goliath was saying concerning God and concerning God, the armies of God. And he said, what are y'all doing? This uncircumcised Philistine, you let him say these kind of things against God and against the armies of God. And they said, boy, shut up, you just a little punk. You don't know nothing about nothing. You ain't got no business saying nothing. You don't know what we're dealing with. You don't understand. And David said, I don't know about all this, this other stuff, but I know what God has done for me. When I was out there by myself tending my daddy's sheep, a lion and a bear came to take of my flock, and God anointed me, and I killed the lion, and I killed the bear. And you know what? God is the same God that anointed me to kill that lion and that bear. It ain't no more for God to anoint me to kill this uncircumcised Philistine as it is the lion and the bear. And that past event gave David courage. Amen. You got to remember what God has done. Psalm 77:11 says, remember the works of the Lord. Has God done anything for you? Amen. You don't let your discouragement cause you to forget. Don't let your discouragement cause you not to understand who God is and what God can do. Remember the works of God. Yes. And remember thy wonders of old. See, sometimes, you maybe don't see nothing happening right now in your life, but look back and see what God has done. Amen. So you encourage yourself by remembering past events. And do you not know? You know the story of David. That young man, went through the brook and got him, some stones and put it in his bag and grabbed his slingshot, and he went across that brook and he killed that 9-foot giant. Yeah. When nobody else would even think about going, send me somebody. Just send me your champion. I'm not going to kill all of you. Send me your champion. And if your champion can defeat me, this war will be over. Yeah. And they were so afraid and discouraged by what they saw that they wouldn't even go out against Goliath. Yeah. But a boy. Not with weapons of armor. Saul said, well, go ahead, boy, as long as I ain't got to go. And not only that, I'll let you use my armor. Here's my sword, my shield, and all my armor. And David tried on that stuff and said, I'm proving this stuff. This stuff don't even fit me. Take this mess back. I'm going to use what God has proven. What has he proven to me? Just my little slingshot and some rocks. You got to use the things that God has proven to you. Amen. See, you trying to do things based upon somebody else. With the weapons that somebody else God using somebody else's life. And you reading books and you doing this and doing that. About how folk got victory. You better find some things in your life that's gonna give you victory. Because the things that God used in somebody else's life, He may not use it in your life. And these things have to be proven or put to the test. Yes. So first of all, you encourage yourself. Yes. Secondly, you have to go to God. You have to learn how to inquire from God. 1 Samuel 30:7-8, David said after they had told him that they won't stone him, he went to God and he inquired of the Lord. And he called the priest Abiathar, and he said, bring me the ephod. The ephod was a vest that the priest wore that had different stones in it. And God would allow those stones to light up for certain things. And that's how God spoke to them. And David said, bring me the vestment, of how God speaks to me. In other words, I need to go to God and find out what God has to say about the matter. And Abiathar brought David, the ephod, and David inquired of the Lord. Sometimes when we get discouraged, instead of us going to the Lord, we go to people, or we just, we go off by ourselves and isolate ourselves and have a pity party. And, we just rehearse all those things that are discouraging us over and over in our mind. And instead of us going to the one that can deliver us from the situation, namely God, we run away from him and we retreat into our world, our little world of discouragement, our world of pity party, and we just stay there and instead of us encouraging ourselves in the Lord, we encourage ourselves in discouragement. Instead of us going to God and saying, God, what do you want me to do about this situation? I need to inquire of you. I need to find out from you, God, what you want me to do about this situation. We go the opposite direction. Yeah. But David inquired of the Lord. He said, bring me the ephod. He said, bring me the thing that I'm going to get an answer from God. The third thing you must do, you must get a word from the Lord. See, it's not enough for you just to, to go to God in prayer. You got to wait till God tells you something. Oh, you're discouraged and you're praying and you're asking God, what do you want me to do, God? But you're not waiting long enough for God to tell you what to do. Yes. When you pray, it's not just a monologue. Yeah. In other words, you're just telling God, what about your, what's going on in your life, telling them all about your trouble, telling them all about your situation and your circumstance. Oh, you're telling them all those things. Okay, nothing wrong with you telling them all about your trouble, but you need to wait till he gives you instructions about how to deal with your trouble. Amen. And what we do sometimes, we go out and pour our hearts to God, about what's going on, and yet we don't stay long enough for God to give us the instructions about how to deal with it.